One of the best books I've read in the last 12 months is a book called Go for No. Go for No. The subtitle of the book is that yes is the destination, but no is how you get there. So the whole book is about the idea that most people avoid no. They avoid getting rejected. They avoid taking big swings. And you don't really know how much you could get if you've never actually tried. So in that book, they give a really great example, a great little parable or story of a young salesperson. It's a young salesman who works at a suit shop. This person gets paid on commission, and a very wealthy man comes in and buys a bunch of clothes, buys a bunch of suits and stuff like that. The young salesman is really blown away and excited. After this wealthy man checks out, the young salesman runs up to the manager and he says, "Holy cow, look at this amazing sale I got. Like, this is going to be a huge commission. This is an amazing day." The manager basically asks him, "How many things did this man say no to?" And the young salesman said, "Nothing. Like, everything he bought was things he picked." And so then the manager said, "Well, then how do you know that that's everything he would have bought if you never actually offered him anything? If you never actually got rejected, then how do you know that that's the top of what was possible?" And so this is a really key concept. It's the idea that most people are too afraid of making big swings or even making any swings. Wayne Gretzky famously said, "You miss every shot you don't take." And so this mindset's really powerful, the idea of going for no. Now, this fits in two categories. Obviously, you want to say no to more and more things that are below your minimum standard. Saying no to more and more things and focusing on less but better, focusing on the essential is really great, but also going for no in terms of taking big swings. And so I ask you, when was the last time you got seriously rejected on something? This morning, I was journaling and I decided to go for no in a big way. I decided to make some big swings and we'll see what happens. But if you're not making big swings, if you're not making big offers, if you're not seeking big opportunities, you never know really what you can get, and you never know what's possible if you're not getting rejected. And so if you're not getting rejected a lot, if you're not getting a lot of no's, then you don't actually know your limit. If you're getting a lot of yeses, what that means is that you're probably playing small. And the people who are willing to go for a no are going to obviously get a lot more opportunities. This is something I even learned as a blogger. So even, for example, me making this video, when I was making blog posts back in the day, back when I was in my PhD program, and my main goal, my keystone goal, and by the way, a keystone goal, if you know what a keystone is, the keystone is the center stone in an arch. It's what holds the arch together. And if you knock out the keystone, then it knocks everything else out. This fits with a great quote, by the way, from the billionaire Gary Keller, who wrote the book, The One Thing. He said, "What's the one thing that, if achieved, helps you achieve everything else you want?" And so this is the highest leverage goal. So back then, my highest leverage goal, or my keystone goal, my one thing, was to get a 6-figure book deal with a major publisher. And I learned by reverse engineering that I needed to get a huge email subscriber base and start writing blogs and building an audience. One thing that's really crazy is that when you're writing blogs or making content, largely you can't fully predict the things that are going to work. But you have to go for no. You got to take a lot of swings, and often it's quantity that over time leads to quality. As an example, I would post a blog post that I had no expectations on, and sometimes that thing would go mega viral and open up all sorts of amazing opportunities. Now, this doesn't mean that you just swing for the sake of swinging. You do want to become increasingly thoughtful about the swings you take. But if you're not taking swings, and especially if you're not taking big swings, and if you're not getting rejected, then what that means is that you don't actually know your level. And eventually you can normalize the new standard. You can get to the point, for example, raising the floor. And this is something I learned from a mentor of mine and a friend of mine named Chad Willardson. He's a very successful and just brilliant financial advisor. So when he was first starting out as a financial advisor, he decided that his minimum standard, his threshold, his bottom threshold would be $100,000. If someone were to invest in him, they'd have to have at least $100,000 or else he would say no. That was his minimum standard. And he was actually advised by his bosses, managers, that was just going to be an impossible initial level for a brand new advisor. He was like in his early 20s. But Chad just decided to set a minimum standard and go for no. And it took him 6 months, pitching himself over and over to people with that much money to invest. For 6 months, he just got no's. But eventually, a person called him back, and because Chad had followed up, and that first person he got had $600,000 to roll into a retirement account. And so over time, Chad normalized that standard, even though he got a lot of no's for a long time by having a really high minimum standard. And so what happened is over time, Chad normalized that standard. He got good at that standard. This is a concept, by the way, called fitness function, that you get what you focus on and you get what you optimize yourself for. And so because he was focused on that level rather than a lower level, because he was focused on that level, he eventually developed mastery at that level. He eventually learned how to talk to people at that level. He eventually learned what these kind of people are looking for because he was focused on that level, he optimized for it, and he developed skills, or what psychologists would call deliberate practice, at that level. There's a great quote on this, by the way, by Naval Ravikant. He said that becoming an outlier is not about 10,000 hours, it's about 10,000 iterations. 10,000 hours is what Malcolm Gladwell talked about, which is accumulation of experience. But accumulation or quantity of experience is not really about quality of experience. The quality of your experience is based on what you're focused on and what you're striving to become, what you're committed to, which is your minimum standard. And so because Chad was focused on that, he was essentially learning and becoming that kind of person. That's what he was iterating himself into. That's what he was learning about, getting feedback on. And there's a great concept and quote, and this fits with a concept called epigenetics, which is basically the idea that perception takes experience and turns it into biology. What that means is that what you're focused on, you essentially are converting into your biology, who you become. And so because he was focused on that, he developed a brain and skills and abilities and an identity and even a physical body that optimized for that level. Over time, he raised his standard. Once he normalized that standard, once he became really successful at that standard, he raised his minimum standard to 250,000. And once he made that new standard, he no longer accepted people at that new standard. And then he started getting a lot more no's. Eventually, he went off and he became he built his own private fiduciary and he set the minimum standard at $1 million. Entrepreneurs with $1 million to invest, he wouldn't take anything less. And yes, he got a lot of no's. But eventually because whatever you focus on expands, and whatever you're optimizing for, you're creating iterations towards. Every day, your daily process is ultimately iterating towards what you're committed to. Most people are not committed to something specific, some specific standard. Instead, they're just committed to their current comfort zone and just current results, short-term wins. But when you set a high minimum standard and then you really commit to that and you say no to everything below it, then it becomes a forcing function where you really have to learn the nuances and basically you learn at that level. Psychologists call it selective attention. You focus on that, you develop mastery towards that, and you're ultimately iterating towards that. You're turning your perception and your experience into the biology of your future self and becoming that person. Now, Chad's minimum standard is 10 million. He gets a lot of no's for two reasons. One is he says no to a lot of people with less than that, people who in the past he would have said yes to, but now he says no to because he has a higher minimum standard. So he's saying no to a lot of brilliant, lucrative opportunities at a higher standard. But also, he's getting a lot of no's because a lot of people now he's going for, the much bigger fish, are saying no to him. And he's learning how to basically master that level. And we develop mastery and expertise at the level we're focused on. That whole concept is fitness function. Fitness function is, what are you optimizing for? What's the standard that you're ultimately transforming yourself into? This fits with a great quote from the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, that you are what you're committed to, and that commitment is a statement of what is. And so when you set a minimum standard commitment and you really go for no at that level, eventually you can normalize that level. Eventually you deliberately practice and become at that level, but it takes a lot of commitment, courage, and then ultimately deliberate practice and developing the capability and confidence at that level. I love Dan Sullivan's 4Cs model. The first, you commit to a higher minimum standard, and you'll probably get a lot of no's and a lot of failures at that level. But over time, through that courage, deliberate practice, eventually you normalize that identity, you develop skills, abilities, and eventually that just becomes your new normal. And you've ultimately iterated yourself into that future self. I often go and speak at big events, but I also train leadership teams. And recently we doubled my fee. And so as a result, we've started to get a lot more no's. That's a really powerful thing, because once you start getting yeses at the new fee, that builds massive confidence rather than getting yeses at the old level, at the old lower standard. So my invitation to you is raise your minimum standard and start getting no's and start optimizing and mastering at that level. And eventually you'll start normalizing that level and boom. But also go for no at a really high level and start swinging for the fences. So raising your minimum standard is raising your floor. That's a powerful way of going for no. But another powerful way of going for no is about raising your ceiling and really taking swings at a much higher ceiling and being okay, being comfortable, even celebrating getting no's. That is what I love about that book. Yeah, basically, yes is the destination, but no is how you get there. And rather than avoiding failure, you actually celebrate failure. Rather than basically just showing your highlight reel and saying, here's the wins, what if you actually start saying, here's the no's that I've recently gotten, and compare those notes with your friends and actually celebrate all of the no's you get, because the no's you get are a representation of what you're optimizing yourself for, what you're learning. You're setting a much higher bar, a much higher standard that eventually you will normalize. Eventually you'll take those 10,000 iterations and eventually you'll master the level that you're currently getting tons of no's at. I hope you're swinging for the fences. I hope you're clear on your 10x, minimum standard, and you're celebrating the no's along the way, that you're raising your floor or your minimum standard and saying no to the things that you once said yes to, but you're also massively raising your ceiling and going for no on a high level. Go for no. If you're not taking big swings, then essentially you're just operating out of whatever life gives you. I love the book, The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, and he talks about how you don't have to be courageous 24/7. Even if you're just courageous for like 20 seconds or 30 seconds a day, like 1 to 2 minutes a day, that little bit of going for no Eventually, you'll start getting some rare yeses. Eventually, you'll start getting some yeses and opportunities that are mind-blowing, like Chad did when he got that first $600,000 client. Because he was going for no to high level, he eventually got some really high-level yeses. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I invite you to clarify your future self and start going no for that by raising your floor, saying no to everything below, optimizing for that level, committing to that level, normalizing that level, and also massively taking big swings, because eventually you're going to get some big yeses that it's a numbers game. You're eventually going to get some massive yeses because you are in the game and because you are going for it. And as they say, it's not the critic that counts, it's the person who's in the arena. So if you haven't yet read my book, 10X is easier than 2X, link down below, or you can go to Amazon. Please grab 10X is easier than 2X. If you have read it, would you please leave a review? It would help me a lot. Have an amazing day. Talk to you soon.